way too cold for my liking. But I'm glad to see. Looks like we've got about 73, 74 people on right now. So it's encouraging to see the numbers. I know virtual, especially this time of year, makes it easier for everybody to be able to join, and safety is paramount for the county. So full support of this virtual meeting as well. So some updates I wanted to share with, I guess, with the group this morning, related to several ongoing items in the division. Uh, those of you for the TMAC branch, which is the traffic counting and equipment management branch in the Division of Planning, over the past year, they have been developing a mobile app to be able to utilize for each one of our traffic count techs in the district. It'll be fully mobile. It's been being worked on in conjunction with High Desert, who is the company that actually provides all our traffic count information. The Division of Information and Technology with Will Holmes's group have all been on the project team. With this, iPads were provided to all field techs back in 2022. So this will be a new thing for us as we roll out counts for this 2024 year. Um, Robert Brown is the branch manager for that group, and he is looking to schedule another traffic count meeting. This will be held probably in March, but we are looking to hold that at a state park. So look for emails and correspondence from Robert on that. All the traffic count techs should plan to attend that meeting, and planning supervisors, y'all are also welcome to attend if you choose. For data management, so as a result of the census, the 2020 census, Ramsey's going to be talking to us today about the update to the urban area boundaries. So we submitted that to FHWA on December the 22nd, right before Christmas. So we got that in on time. Thank you for all of you that provided information to that. I know a significant amount of coordination was required, especially with all your locals to be able to get those urban areas modified. And a big thanks to both Ramsey Quarles and Gretchen Sanford in my division of planning who really put this all together and got this submitted to FHWA. Shift. So I know Shift was in talking to our leadership call yesterday. Deputy Secretary Hancock mentioned that the recommended highway plan was going to be submitted to the legislature today. And checking my emails just before this morning, it looks like Ron Rigney sent that over about 9 o'clock. So the recommended highway plan has now been submitted to the legislature. So I want to thank everybody on this call. I know you'll had a significant help in putting together all that for all the, working with the locals, working with sponsorships, booths, and all the coordination that were always as a part of Shift. And the Division of Planning plays a big part in the recommended highway plan. So thank you all for all your help and efforts. Some of the grants, I know grants are always something that y'all like to hear about. Unfortunately, the charging and fueling infrastructure grant that was awarded a couple of weeks ago. So Kentucky had 6 submissions. Unfortunately, we did not have any winners for that this go around. So especially with that one came out. Didn't have a lot of time to be able to put that together before the window closed last year. And I went talking with several of the ads and several others across the state. We expect significant more applications in this coming year, this coming cycle. Now that we know kind of what we're looking for, we hope to be able to get a debrief to see exactly what we can strengthen on our applications. But yes, if we get that any information, we will pass along to you all to be able to help you put together those applications for your areas. NEVI, it's our electric vehicle initiative. Everybody probably should know, but there were 24 sites that were awarded back in October for slightly more than $15 million. RFP2. Justin Harrod is in our group are working on RFP2, which we anticipate to go out within the next month. And I will share the map on my screen there. So that's where we currently are. Uh, the bubbles in yellow are the credible EV sites before we started this effort, and the ones in orange and purple there on your screen are the ones that we awarded back in October via the first RFP. So you see there the gaps. There's 14 more stations that we'll be looking for, specifically targeting these exit locations along the interstates and parkways. Uh, it's important for us to be able to get the interstates and parkways built out. That will allow us to move on to high priority corridors, such as US 119 out there in eastern Kentucky, as well as a AA highway, for instance. So once we get built out certification from FHWA, built that on all our alternative fuel AFCs, alternative fuel corridors, we will be able to move on to other high priority locations in the state. So it's important that we get applications for RFP2 in these areas, and we anticipate about a 60-day turnaround once the RFP is released here in the next month. So we're looking at possible awards somewhere in the April or May timeframe for these gaps. Let's see. And then the last thing I wanted to share was the GHG rule. So this rule was issued by FHWA on December the 7th. It is actually went into effect on January the 8th of 2024. So it requires states to establish declining targets in our report, which is due on February the 1st. We are coordinating with executive management to be able to submit that by February the 1st. And we're aware also there's significant coordination that has to happen with the MPOs. The MPOs have to submit their targets and declining CO2 emissions 180 days after our state targets. So that's a topic we'll be discussing with the MPO meeting later on this afternoon. To be able to share and have some good discussion on what we're doing with the GHG. That is all I've got this morning. I can figure out how to stop sharing my screen, but I will turn it back over to Stephen.
Thank you. Yeah, let me know when you figure out Teams. It's only been 3-4 years.
I know, but I'm on 2 different devices.
Okay. No, thank you, Mikhail, and thank you for all your hard work in keeping all this running. Now, very happy to introduce Nick Vale from our partners at Federal Highway to give an update from the federal side.
Appreciate it. Thanks, y'all. Hope you're having a good morning. All right, we've got a number of updates. I wanted to kind of start just kind of locally at the division level in terms of some personnel changes since the last meeting in October. We hired a new area engineer, Sam Griffith. So he comes to us from the private sector. He's joining David Whitworth's team on engineering and operations. Our major projects engineer, Michael Losell, took a new job, a promotion with headquarters. So he's going to be working on discretionary grants, and I think primarily the mega grants at the national level. And Laura Thur, who was our program management analyst, she also took a promotion with headquarters. So we, I think, have both vacancies for program management analyst and major projects engineer open for applications. In terms of grants, I know I'll just kind of tag along since Mikhail spoke about that last. There's a number of discretionary grants that are being reviewed right now or have been over the last month or so, and announcements may be coming soon regarding whether it's Protect, Reconnecting Communities, SMART grants, Bridge Investment Program, discretionary funds. So there's a number of those that are currently under review. As most folks know, the RAISE grants, the new cycle opened up on November 30th, and it closes on February 28th. And I have a note from Aaron Buckner, who's the division's discretionary grants advisor, to note that for professional services procurement procedures will need to be in place to proceed with agreements. There's additional guidance for recipients. Obviously, this is one of the many programs that LPAs can apply for directly. But nonetheless, we have some resources and whatnot that I'll put out in the chat just for information after this presentation. And related to kind of discretionary grants and local some of the LPA awarded discretionary grants. So FHW has been developing risk-based plans and working with those recipients to kind of work through the contracting, the FHW approval process, and agreements. Tanya has a few things that I wanted to note on her behalf. We are currently reviewing those urban area boundaries provided by KYTC before Christmas. The annual Kentucky Vehicle Size and Weight Annual Enforcement Report is being reviewed. The final Heavy Vehicle Use Tax, HVUT, triannual compliance report was completed in 2023 and found in KYTC was found in compliance with requirements of 23 CFR 699 and Section 23 USC 141. So we appreciate the help on those. One note from Ryan Tinges, just if you're in contact with SS4A grant recipients, make sure they're being directed to him. Ryan is the lead for the SS4A program at the division level. All right, let's see what else we got. So a few different pieces of note, kind of on the environmental side of things. I'm kind of the air quality lead. We started quarterly statewide conference calls for all things related to transportation and air quality and everything in between. So EPA did note that the clean diesel school bus rebate program is ending soon. Apparently there's a ton of funding and it's all going to be released at one time versus annually over the next 3 years. So there's one big push going on there. So if you guys have partners at the school district level, that's a good program to take note of. Let's see, where was it? Mikhail mentioned the GHG period, and we'll probably talk more about that with the MPOs and whatnot at the afternoon meeting or after this meeting. We'll talk more about that. There's a new vulnerability assessment scoring tool that's kind of some technical assistance that's being offered to state DOTs, MPOs, and others on help in developing vulnerability assessments for their transportation assets. This is a useful tool, kind of goes along with the planning process and the development should the state plan to update or whatnot, the resilience improvement program. I'll plug some links about that here in a second in the chat. EPA has a port infrastructure grant program. More information should be released, I think, in February. There's going to be about $650 million available for, a lot of electrification of vehicles and other things in and around port infrastructure. And let me see if I double check my emails to see if there's anything else that I missed. I think the only other thing I would say is Yeah, the Bridge Investment Program's Planning and Bridge Project. NOFO is available. It looks like applications for this round must be submitted by March 19th, 2024. And I think that covers everything that I had on my list. I'm sure there's others that I missed. There's a lot of moving pieces right now. If there's any questions or comments about specific federal highway initiatives, I'd be happy to, chime in where I can or get more information if I need to.
Yeah, thank you, Nick, and thank you for being a better facilitator of this than I am by actually asking if anyone had any questions. So if there's any questions for Nick or for that matter for Mikhail, please feel free. I saw a little bit of comment in the chat that we might be following up directly about some NEVI specifics. But are there any other questions for our first two speakers? Okay. Thank you, Nick. Always good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely.
See you at the soccer games.
For sure.
With that, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Nathan Ridgway to introduce our next slate of presenters.
All right, good morning, everybody. Brent's already on the spot. So Brent, if you want to go on and get your presentation pulled up and share your screen, I'm going to run through your bio real quick and then you can take over. Brent Swager works as a planning engineer with the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet Division of Planning. He leads a plethora of planning studies from small urban area studies to corridor-wide improvements. He's worked for KYTC since 2003 and for Federal Highway Administration prior to coming to the cabinet. He's most recently been involved with the formation of the Creating Vibrant Communities program aimed at linking transportation and land use planning. Today, he'll be giving us an update on the launching of the CVC program and the selection of the 2024 recipients. So go ahead and take it, Brent.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Nathan, and good morning, everybody. As Nathan mentioned, today I wanted to give you an update on what's going on with the Creating Vibrant Communities program. Back in October at our last statewide transportation planning meeting, I gave you a little bit of an introduction to what that was. So let's start with just recapping what the program's about and what we're trying to achieve. So what we're really trying to do is start having cities, counties, communities start thinking about their future and really just start to do some proactive planning. And as part of the planning process, looking not just at land use, but land use, transportation, and then the development of that land. So how can all of them work together? And with the program, we're asking communities to look at specific areas. So not a citywide plan, but something on a much smaller scale, something that's manageable. We want to create a place that's unique, and we want to help them transform that area that's a unique destination. And what we mean by that is not necessarily, well, a unique destination could be where people live, could be where people work or set up a business, or it could be a place where you have entertainment or tourism. So it's up to the community to define what they really are wanting. So through this program, we're going to help them create a plan, create a vision, look at some conceptual development plans, and then an important piece of this will be what are the things that they need to consider doing to make this a reality, to take it from a concept to actually getting things built. So we'll give them some ideas on what might need to be done at the staffing level or the organizational level, as well as things that they can actually do, such as funding opportunities that they can apply for, or creating districts like a TIF district that will help build that infrastructure. So we have our team, the combination of the Transportation Cabinet staff here in Division of Planning, along with our consultant team that will be working with the local officials, local staff, other local leaders, possibly some developers, and of course the public, to create this plan. And as I shared with you last time, we have 3 main goals. Once again, you can kind of simplify this and say, what are the future land uses for that area? What do we need to create a transportation system that supports that land use? And then what needs to be done to get this built so that you create a strong, economically viable part of the city. An important piece, and I need to keep coming back to this, is we talk a lot about land use and land use planning as part of the CVC program, but just as importantly, we are focusing in on transportation, and there's a lot of potential benefits. Each area will be different. All of these bullet points will be slightly different in each of the cities that are selected. But let me run through these. It has the potential to really plan and build a more robust network, one that's redundant, allows flexibility, allows connections within the given area that we're looking at, as well as connections outside of that to other parts of the city. We'll look at existing roadways as well as future roads to potentially change the context. We're going to look at the current and future land use context, and then try to plan for roadways that are appropriate in terms of their scale and elements that control the speeds to make them as safe as they possibly can be within that context. Certainly walkability is going to be an important piece of this. And then something that I think has a lot of potential is to reduce the amount of vehicular trips on our network by looking at this mixture of land uses and creating compact development. And by doing that, that allows a lot of these trips to stay internal. You might have more opportunities for walking and biking rather than driving, but certainly the driving trips would be much shorter. And then finally, we'll be looking at, are there ways to reduce conflicts along our roadways so it makes it safer for all the users, reduce conflicts for drivers as well as for pedestrians and cyclists. And we'll do this by considering access management techniques, as well as looking at, are there better ways to plan and design our intersections. Okay, so back in October at our STP meeting, that was the week that we opened up the application process. And I let you all know about the program, and many of you got the word out to your local communities across your area, so I want to thank all of you that did that. Those of you at the district offices, area development districts, MPOs. We also tried to get the word out very broadly, and we did so through the League of Cities, the Kentucky Main Street program, as well as the APA chapter of Kentucky. The application process was open for about 2 months, closed on December 11th. And once we closed it, we got the application information sent out to our selection committee. We had 7 people that served on the selection committee. So they spent several weeks reading those applications and evaluating them and scoring them. And we had metrics that they used to create their or establish those scores. We went over last time's what those measurements were, but it comes down to 70% of it was, is it really meeting the goals that we've outlined? And we had some detail, a lot more details in the criteria on our website. And then how ready is the project and how ready is the community? Is this a one-person show, or are there a lot of people that are on board and supportive of this effort? So we got together on, the selection committee got together on January 4th. We went through a process very similar to how the Transportation Cabinet selects consultants through the professional services process. So through some voting, some discussion, and some final voting, we came up with our selections for this round. We were not sure going into this how many applications we were going to get. We were hoping that we'd have at least 3 so that we could have a full slate of plans. We were very pleased to see that there were 14 communities that took the time, put in the effort to submit applications. And we had a lot of really good applications in there to choose from. So it made the selection committee's job pretty tough. But in the end, we were excited to come up with 4 recipients for this time. So let me share those with you right now. So the communities of Moorhead, Glendale, and Elizabethtown, and then Jeffersontown. So I'm not going to dive into too much on their specific applications this time. I'm hoping that at a future SDP meeting, Nathan, you're interested in getting more topics, that maybe in the summertime, we'll be able to share the details of each one of these. But we're excited to get working with each one right away. And I'm hoping that, let me just say that for those communities that didn't make it this time around, we certainly, we're going to send something official to each of them. And as part of that, we're going to offer an opportunity to have a debriefing. So if any of them would like to hear about the feedback from the selection committee, both positive or anything that could be improved, we'd be happy to do that. So the next steps here, we're actually meeting next week with each of the recipients. We're going to have a scoping meeting to talk about their project a little bit and get into forming that scope for our consultants' work. So the schedules starting in February, we'll have a kickoff, and we're going to be creating an engagement plan for the community. Like all of our planning studies, public involvement and defining the appropriate level of public involvement is a critical piece. So we'll be doing that and looking at the base conditions, what's out there right now in terms of the roadway networks, the existing land uses, et cetera. Then in the springtime, we'll be doing some visioning exercises and setting some goals and strategies with each of the cities. In the summertime, late spring and summertime, we'll be getting into the details and forming what some of these concepts are and getting some feedback on that. And then we're looking to do some, basically wrap it up in the early fall, where we'll create a plan, a draft plan, possibly get some feedback on that, and then create that final plan. And then working with each of the cities to adopt them. So getting the city or the county to adopt it, as well as planning commissions. And then, talking to them about how they can actually move these initiatives forward towards reality. So we're excited to move this forward. I'm sure there's a question on whether we're going to be doing this as a second round. That's to be answered. We're going to, I think, take a look and see how this goes. But I would say there is a possibility that in fiscal year 25, we may go for another round of these. So stay tuned on that. And with that, Nathan, I'm going to turn it back to you.
All right, thank you, Brent. Does anybody have any questions for Brent before we go to our next speaker? All righty, thank you, Brent, for presenting, and we'll look forward to hearing more about these when they get more defined. With that being said, Natalie Flores is our next speaker. Hello, Natalie. Good morning. If you want to go on and get your presentation pulled up and start sharing screen, I'll run through your bio real quick and then turn it over to you.
Thank you.
Natalie Flores has over 5 years of planning experience working as a transportation planner with the Bluegrass Ad and currently with KCI Technologies. She has a bachelor's degree in business sustainability from Arizona State University and a master's degree in public administration from Murray State University. Recently, she earned her AICP from the American Planning Association. Her presentation today will discuss community transportation planning in rural and semi-rural areas. So with that being said, Natalie, you're free to speak.
Thank you so much. I just want to check to make sure everybody can hear me okay. Can I get a verification on that real quick?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be back at an STP meeting, albeit virtually. I used to be the planner at the Bluegrass Area Development District, and now I'm with KCI Technologies. So it is a pleasure to virtually see you all again. And I hope that this presentation gives you something at least to think about or some new information. I'll give you a little bit of an about us because I know that KCI hasn't had a big presence in Kentucky. But I, along with Will Hager, which is our planning practice leader, are in this meeting today. But we're a team of 4 planners, including Liesel and Hannah, that are based in the Nashville office. In addition to our planning team, we also have traffic and transportation design engineering groups that we work closely with that are also in the Nashville office. A quick agenda for today. I'll do a very short overview over rural transportation planning, and then give some examples of how we incorporated rural transportation planning into a couple of different types of plans. I'll then have time for some questions and comments, and then also some rural community resources. I put those at the end in case we go long. It's my understanding that the presentations are available afterwards. So if you do need those rural community resources or would like to look through them and we don't have time to go over them, then those are at the end and then you can get those. I'm assuming that KYTC or someone from the cabinet will be able to send those to you. All right, so going over real quick, so rural transportation planning overview and why is it important? We get a lot of 80% of Americans live in urban and metropolitan areas. So why is rural planning important? And it is true that 19% of Americans live in rural areas, but these areas have 43% of our highway fatalities. The fatality rate per vehicle miles traveled is 1.7 times greater in rural areas. 68% of total lane miles are in rural areas, and 9 times the amount of lane miles per 100K residents in rural areas versus our urban areas. Additionally, historic planning, whenever you consider a rural area, if it existed, because in many times it had been absent, it treated rural areas as a monolith, as if every rural area has the same character or has the same problems. The proximity of the rural community to a larger city or interstate, growth and development trends, population density, availability of quality medical services, emergency services, and other factors really impact how you plan for a community. So you can't just walk into a rural community and assume that you know what their problems are and what the solution is. It really is about talking to the community and figuring out innovative ways to bring about transportation and a better network for their community. Going into our first one, we're going to talk about the Perry County Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan. So Perry County is a very small population-wise county in Tennessee. It's the second lowest in population with about 8,000 residents. It's located along the Tennessee River in Middle Tennessee, but it has a unique set of natural and cultural resources. These are some of the recreation opportunities. The Tennessee River Trails bisects Perry County from north to south. In that map to the left, you can kind of see Perry County in the middle and then to the right. So it goes straight through. It really is a group of trails that are for any type of rider. So if you are an avid cyclist or a novice, even cycling for children, there are routes available for them as well. So many avid cyclists follow this path and follow these or go to trails specifically for their difficulty level. And some of those are located in Perry County. In addition, I just mentioned that the county itself has a population of 8,000, but Mousetail Landing State Park is a tourism driver in the area, receiving about 250,000 or 250,000 annual visitors. So it is even though it is a small residential population, it has a very high, it is a very busy tourism destination. Continuing on, so we talked about how the bike trails kind of bisect from north to south, the Perry County. But then to the west, we have the state park, which we mentioned. But I want to really focus on the east, which is the Mennonite community, because this is something that was a little bit unique about this project. Because to the east, on Highway 438, it is known as Mennonite Main Street. And whenever you think of a main street, you typically think of a town square, you think of possibly older buildings, a courthouse, your county clerk's office, but this is their main street. And I think it's really important that no matter what the community is, that we make sure to meet them where they are. This is their main street, so how do we make it safer for the people that live there? As you can see, there are some Mennonite women who are walking along the side of the road. Along this corridor, there are areas where there are ditches, where there are bridges, where it is really unsafe for pedestrians to get back and forth. But this is where there is a large Mennonite community, their Mennonite church, their produce stands. In addition to the beautiful nature that surrounds this corridor, it is also important to make sure that the people in the community can travel there safely. Whenever, again, talking about how rural transportation planning isn't a monolith, even in a single county, we can have 4 different community types or 4 different regions that really define what is needed. So again, in the north and south, cyclist trail connectivity was something that was prioritized. Park and marina connectivity was prioritized in the west corridor, but safer routes for the Mennonite community was prioritized in the east corridor. And whenever we looked at all these recommendations, they were all matched with potential funding sources in both the state and federal level. Again, realizing that rural communities sometimes don't have the finances themselves to go after such projects, we want to make sure that whatever does get recommended, we match that with a good fit or potential good fit for a grant application. These are some of the recommendations and the cross segments for that eastern segment, which is the Mennonite residential area in the Mennonite community. So you can see that cross section includes a shared use path. And then you can see along with the map, you can see the bridge crossings, you can see the steep right of way. There's a Cane Creek access, which should be a trail a potential trail access right there. There's also a trailhead at King Creek Market. And then the Mennonite Church is also in that area. So again, just making sure that we talked with the community, found out what they needed. And in this section, it definitely a shared use path made the most sense. In addition, if you know an avid cyclist, it is not too much of an ask for them to go and try out a new trail or to go to a trail, even if it's a little detour away. And so with the proximity of this to the trails that bisect Perry County, it is also expected that once constructed, this would also be another resource for tourism in the area and for cyclists that come to Perry County. Moving on, I'll go to the Sneedville Complete Streets Plan. A little background on Sneedville. So Sneedville is in Hancock County, which is categorized as economically distressed by the ARC. So this means that it's among the top 10 distressed counties in the United States. That's a population of just over 1,300. And the median household income is nearly half the state average. So taking this into account, it is really important to make sure that every road user has the ability to travel safely. In the pictures, you can see a cyclist on the road with vehicles, and then also a motorcycle with a tractor with a tanker, all on the same road, all at the same time. And I'm sure that you see this a lot. And in your own communities, this is something that happens where everybody on the road all at once. It's a very has great variety in the types of vehicles that use these roadways. And so we want to make sure that our most vulnerable road users are protected, especially as in this area. And as I'll mention in or as I'll go into detail more in a moment, there are sidewalk gaps. And so people walk in the street or they walk through parking lots. And it is an increasingly unsafe area as there is more traffic and as there is more variety of traffic, including these heavy vehicles. A little bit more about Sneedville. So nearly twice as many people commute into Sneedville for work than commute out. I mentioned that about 1,300 people live in Sneedville, but the southern portion of Main Street receives 4,800 vehicles a day. So almost around 3.5, almost 4 times the amount of vehicles per day as residents that live in the area. So for the type of area that it is and for the residents that it has, this is a pretty high percent of vehicles that travel throughout the roadway. So not only for the people that live there, but also for the people that commute in for work, making a complete streets plan and making sure that this road is really safe for all users will benefit everybody, including people that live outside of Sneedville. Existing conditions, as I mentioned slightly before, include sidewalk gaps, shoulders that blend into business parking, the lack of street lighting, and marked crossing locations. There are also multiple destinations along the study corridor that again make it highly traveled for a variety of reasons. Schools, parks, multifamily low-income housing, library, hospitals, and others all belong on this corridor. And so you can see how with higher levels of traffic as compared to the rest of Sneedville, with a higher percent of people cycling and walking, with sidewalk gaps, with as you can see, this parking, you can't really see when the parking stops and the shoulder starts. It really creates this situation where it's really dangerous, not just for the vulnerable road users, but also for people using vehicles. And we can see that in how the crashes occur. So 84 crashes occurred between 2009 and 2019. The crash rate for this corridor is 5.58. The typical or expected crash rate for a corridor like this is 1.65. So it is many times higher than the crash rate that exists is many times higher than what would be expected. And again, in the study, it found that frequent conflict points contributed to the high number of crashes. Some of the recommendations were for small infrastructure improvements, such as getting more sidewalks in, and then also constructing bulb outs just to help again space out sort of what is parking and what is a driving lane, so that people aren't driving where other people are trying to park. And these were all put into 5 different sections, so section A through E, and this helps break it apart into sort of bite-sized pieces so that the community doesn't have to try to get the funding for the entire corridor all at once, try to prioritize everything all at once. It also helps if you do one section to have that proof of concept and that proof that it works for the community so that they can see, oh, this is something that we want and this is something that we would like to continue. However, because of the high volume of traffic comparatively, the mixed use of traffic where it is very heavy vehicles and also pedestrians and cyclists, and also the extreme need for the community, it was decided to develop models for an interim improvement. And this is something that was very unique for this project, is that they modeled interim improvements, including a pedestrian lane. One of the concerns with building just sidewalks everywhere was that it would block access to some buildings that only have street parking. If you have a sidewalk and a curb, how are you going to get on that picture on the right? That's at the brick building is the post office, and all of the parking requires street frontage. So how are you going to get somebody there? And so for an interim improvement, while more was planned about how the sidewalks would be and where they would be located and how to get pedestrians around safely, this was seen as a way to give space to people that are already walking on the roadway, but not do it at a high cost, and to do it in a way where it promoted the safety of the individuals walking, but also helped separate the parking space from the traveling lanes. So that was something that was really different about this project. And then the last project that I will talk about is the Bedford County Corridor Plan. A little overview on Bedford County. So Bedford County, of the 3 that I'm talking about, is the most populous county. It's semi-rural. It's home to about 50,000 residents, but it is growing at a very fast pace, as you can see by the population chart. So it really started taking off around 2014 and 2015, and it's growing at a rate of 11.9%. US 231 is the focus of the plan. The pictures at the bottom showcase some of US 231. It is home to a regional airport, a Walmart distribution center, a justice center, business park, and is also currently being developed. One of the reasons why we were contacted to help with this plan is because they wanted to make sure that Bedford County still retained its rural character while also still trying to get more development and more economic growth. And this is always the balance. It is, we want to keep the rural community, we love the rural community, we love the rural character, we also want to keep growing. How do we balance the two, or how can we encourage more development while protecting the rural nature? And I'll get into that momentarily, but a little bit about the plan. So another thing that we did is we did our public engagement almost completely virtually. We did have a steering committee that met in person, but for public comments, we created a public webpage or a project landing page that provided a number of things, and that was also really easily accessed and shared by the stakeholders and by the county officials, just to give everybody a space that was frequently updated with project timelines and with different aspects of the plan as they were completed, just so that you don't have to have all the information. A lot of our county officials are pretty busy. If somebody asked about this, it was much easier to send them to the webpage than to try to describe everything that was going on. In addition to the webpage, a PDF flyer was also created and sent out. This was just to help put in prominent areas and help get the word out about the corridor plan without people having to find it, having to find the advertisement for it online, and it was advertised by the county through their Facebook page. We did get 310 unique visitors to the website, and 23 comments were left on an interactive map, so they could choose what their concern was about and drop that on the map where that concern was, and then comment on it. And then they could also leave comments on other people's comments, which helped us discern where some of the higher intensity issues were. A little bit about the project scope. I did talk about how a major goal was to protect the rural character, and that was especially north of the study area. But the project scope included US 231 from Union Deasonville at Joyce Road to Peacock Lane, and also include 5 study intersections. We also gathered information about key corridor destinations and then also future destinations. So future destinations include Tennessee Downs, a future TCAT campus, MTSU flight school. There are a number of other schools, like an elementary school, that are being planned, and there are also residential areas that are expected to be developed in this area. So with those developments and those planned developments, and with both annual daily traffic, because we did traffic counts for the study, and annual average daily traffic, and we took that into account. And then we made a projected level of service, and that helps us narrow down our recommendations. We also then went by crashes by severity type to kind of see where the problem areas were in this corridor. Again, it is highly trafficked for both the commuters. So this area, or this corridor, US 231, is used to go from Shelbyville to Murfreesboro, but then is also along a network of roads that leads to Nashville. So it's highly trafficked for people going into Nashville or people coming back home. But then also people work right here in this area. As you can see, like I said, Bedford County has a population about 50,000 residents. You think you're looking at average traffic about half that on this corridor. With all this information, and I know it's been a lot, 11 infrastructure improvements were recommended. We also did recommendations that were non-infrastructure. Again, the tourism, the Nearest Green Distillery, and the Tennessee Downs, they are expecting to have events in the future. So we did realize the need for some corridor and management agreements, just so that they could better plan those events and make sure that they didn't have a exacerbated traffic problem. But one of the more unique aspects of this of this plan was the proposed multi-use path. So I mentioned before that they wanted to really keep the rural environment, and this multi-use path was seen as a way for residents and commuters to be able to get to their destination without having to use a vehicle, for people coming in as tourists to be able to travel between tourist destinations that are sometimes less than a mile apart without getting into their vehicle. But it was also seen as a way to promote development and infill development south of the study northern termini, and protect what was north of that from development, really by saying we are building this here, and so promoting development where there is infrastructure. You're going to want your tourism development, your residential development, and other developments to be where there's infrastructure like this, so people don't have to get into a car if they don't want to. So people have a reason to, maybe if you have a small business or commercial area, so have people that walk by and are able to go into your shops. So by having this trail suggested, it really also is going to be used or is seen by the economic development of the county to be able to propose additional or to advocate for additional development in this area and infill that development, rather than it having go further outside the county and contributing to sprawl. So these are some illustrations that were made for that multi-use path. We have two examples, one of it without being on US 231 and one of it being beside US 231. And before I continue on, because I'm almost done, I just want to sort of wrap it up and say, again, this is not an all-encompassing of rural planning or of semi-rural planning, but it does show how every community is different, every need is different. Rural communities aren't a monolith. We've seen just in these three plans, we've seen a multi-use path being used to promote and fill and reduce development where they want to keep it in a rural character. We've seen a main street that looks nothing like any main street that you've seen. And we've seen interim improvements that really aren't seen very much elsewhere in planning. So it really helps to come in with optimism and a really innovative and forward-thinking mindset where you can say, you know what, whatever the problem is, I'm going to come into it and not prescribe the solution before I hear from the community about that. So with that, before we go into community resources, I'll open it up for questions and comments.
Hi, Natalie. This is Cassandra Cruikshank with KYTC DEA.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, good morning. I'm well. Thank you for your presentation. I have kind of a niche question. I run the pollinator initiative for KYTC, and I was kind of curious if you guys had integrated pollinator plots in some of your border areas, and if not, if that is something you all would be interested in doing.
That is something that we would be interested in doing. We really look at some of our green areas more of like look at them as watersheds or look at them as a way to help with stormwater. But we could definitely, think about the pollination or pollinators in addition to that. Thank you so much for your comment.
No problem. Thank you. Maybe I'll get in contact with you after this.
Sure. Thank you.
And this is Bernadette. I think you mentioned it, but I didn't get right. How long was your multi-use path?
Oh, our multi-use path, I believe it was around a 2-mile stretch of corridor. So it would have run along the stretch of that corridor. So I think it was between 1.5 miles and 2 miles. But if you send me an email, I can get you that exact number.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have 2 minutes. So if there's anything else, I'd love to answer your questions now. I will provide my email, of course, if you think of anything later. But I will go very quickly. Or I think, Doug, are you trying to speak?
Well, I was getting ready to ask you if when you guys approached the Mennonite community, because in Carter County, there's a large Mennonite community there. Did you have any opposition from them? Were they very receptive? And if you did have opposition, how did you break through to them?
So this plan was actually developed before I started with KCI, but from what I have heard of the plan, there wasn't much opposition to from the Mennonite community. They also need a way to get, regardless of the weather, a way to walk and a way to get to their stands and their church and their stores. It was definitely something that was more accepted than perhaps could be in some communities. I think that perhaps if you're having a difficult time with certain communities, it does help to, again, do something, maybe a small segment to have a proof of concept to show what could be. And sometimes that's kind of what makes the light bulb click on, is like, oh, this is what it will look like, and it won't really change our community in a way that's detrimental.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. I know that when I first hired in, I was helping to work on the DR plan, One of the groups that I had to talk to about their church services was the Mennonite community, and they were not very receptive to talking to me at all. You know, even though I'm a minister myself, they did not want it. They were very skeptical in talking to me. So I was just wondering if you all ran into that same kind of problem, and if so, how did you deal with it?
Sure. I have a colleague that did work on this plan. So if you send me an email, I will definitely ask her if there was any additional opposition that I may not know about and how they handled that. But thank you for your question.
Absolutely, and happy birthday to you.
For those that don't know, my last conference that while I was still with the ad, whenever we went to lunch, Doug and a few others would tell the waitress it was my birthday and tried to get free food out of it, and they were successful. So that's where that happy birthday comment comes from. Thank you, Doug. All
But
right.
today actually is Natalie's birthday.
No,
so.
it is not. Tom, no, my birthday's in December. Thank you. Y'all are actually closer now than y'all were last time, which was, I think, around June. All right. I am out of time. I will very quickly, with rural community resources, the most thing that I propose, that the biggest proponent I am is the routes or the Roots website. They have a rural set aside filter. You can use that to see grants that have that specific set aside. One thing I want to call out is that I've worked on some Safe Streets for All grants. They normally have the NOFO in the summer or early fall. They have changed the NOFO according to the grants website to February. So if you are looking for a Safe Streets for All grant or to be an applicant, please know that the NOFO is next month or is expected next month. And then I have some links, but those will be available if you would like this presentation. Lastly, I'll go ahead and leave y'all with my contact information. It's pretty simple, natalie.flores@kci.com. And then also Will Hager, who is our planning practice leader, will.hager@kci.com. And our website, www.kci.com. So pretty straightforward. I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to, I'll give you a second to screenshot this information if you need it. Or you can contact some of the facilitators here at KYTC. They have my information and can get it to you. And with that, I will stop sharing my screen. And again, thank you so much. It has been a real pleasure to be back over here.
Awesome. Thank you, thank you, Natalie. Sorry. Great presentation. Does anybody have any other questions before we look to get the next speaker on? Okay. Speaking of the next speaker, Ramsey, are you in the meeting? Because I'm not seeing your name pop up.
Yes, I'm here.
All right, great. I see you now. I don't know why I got hidden. If you want to go on and get your presentation pulled up and share your screen, I will read through your bio real quick, and then you can take the mic and proceed. All right. Ramsey Quarles is a graduate of Eastern Kentucky University and also holds a master's certificate in GIS from Western Kentucky University. He has been with the KYTC since 2009, has been the information systems manager since 2018. Today, we'll be presenting about urban boundaries. And with that being said, Ramsey, you can do your presentation.
All right. Thank you, Nathan. Good morning, everybody. I'm going over the adjusted urban area boundaries that we actually just finished a few weeks ago. So this is something that the cabinet is responsible for. It's something it's done every 10 years. Sorry, I'm trying to do it on my phone and it's sliding. There we go. It's something that we do every 10 years. And it's with urban areas that are with a population of 5,000 or more. So we go through and contact local officials, and we contact the MPOs depending on the population size of the urban area. Then any adjustments that are made, FHWA has to approve those, which we have just sent those off to them for approval. So a couple of programs that rely on this distinction between an urban and a rural area. The first one is functional class. Dealing with STP, I know there's a minimum % of funds that must be spent in rural areas. So once these are updated, they would use those to, I guess, know where to send those funds. Outdoor advertising is another one. And then our HPMS report that we send every year, it was relying on that as well. Let's see. So kind of a starting point is the urban area boundaries are originally published using the U.S. Census Bureau. This year it used the 2020 census data and the urban land use data to come up with, I guess, a starting point for these areas. County boundaries and city incorporated boundaries are not used whatsoever. They can cross county lines, and an urban area can incorporate 2 or 3 different cities. And adjustments to these boundaries are not required. It is in the cabinet's best interest to do adjustments if necessary. So these adjusted urban areas, they're going to include the entire census urban area. It's supposed to be one single contiguous area. So you can't have a piece up here and then, a few miles away, the next piece. It's all got to be connected. So they want it to include basically what the urban footprint of the area is. You want to include urban transportation, any large traffic generators like airports, military bases, big industrial parks, anything that's going to create a lot of traffic. The boundaries need to be easily identified in the field. So, for instance, a road, the boundary can be along a road. You can use tree lines, a visible tree line when there's nothing better around. We've used them, but we try to stay away from them because those can easily be changed. And then, once the tree line's cut down, you can't find it anymore. And you also, when they use the census data to create these boundaries, there's a lot of irregularities. So you kind of want to go through and smooth it out as best you can. So essentially we had some different staff. So we had our central area planning staff, which included myself, and a few others from the data management branch within planning. We also had all the planners in the district offices. They were the ones who reached out to the local officials, the mayors, county judge executives to get their opinion on what each area or their area should be expanded, what should be included. We also did, so the MPOs, and so any area 50,000 population or more, we asked the MPOs to do the same thing. They went through and showed us what they believe should be included. Once we got all this information back, either on maps or as reshaped files, we then, as a planning staff at central office, we went through each urban area, took what local officials and the MPOs and the districts gave us for each area, and most of the time we added those areas. There were some areas that were we weren't sure about, and we kind of asked about more comments about why it was added. There were some places that weren't added. And so, let's see, So essentially, once we got these areas completed, we've then had to send it off to FHWA to get approval, which is what we have done now. This was kind of a proposed schedule. This go around, we for the most part hit all those dates. You can tell it's not a quick, 4 or 5 week process. Getting input from, I think there were 63 urban areas, maybe on, yeah. So your 63 urban areas and 9 MPOs. So trying to get information back from that many different sources can take a while. So go back to schedule. So we try to give everybody enough time to get the information back to us, which most did. I was grateful that I know the MPOs hit their deadline, which is helpful because it gives us plenty of time to go through and look at what they've sent in and kind of send back any questions that we had, and then give them time to respond back. And so I know December 1st was when we wanted to send it away to FHWA. I think we got it. I think it was the week of Christmas. So we got it in just before December 30th, which is when it was due. Let's see. So there's a map of all the urban areas in blue. So just quickly, I kind of wanted to go over some of the rules that we had to go by. So obviously so before we make any adjustments, it's called the census urban boundary. When we go through the cabinet, go through and make our adjustments, and it's published, it's then called the adjusted urban area boundary. So the adjusted urban area boundary, so it had to include what was already in the census boundary. We couldn't take pieces away, even though I really, really wanted to. There's some places that just didn't make sense, but it was what it was, and we couldn't take pieces away. So here's an example of, you see down south and north, there were 2 big pieces that were not connected. And so they had to be connected because they were the same urban area. So usually the best way to do that, if there's nothing really urban in between, is to go right through the highway like that. So here's an example of I think this was a major traffic generator. I think there's some apartment complexes in there. There's a little commercial warehouse there in the white roof. That all needed to be added because it's very urban. So you can look at this picture and see how irregular the green is. That's that's the census before we even got started with this one. Just very irregular. Let's see. So here's another traffic generator that needed to be added. Let's see. So this is the same one as before, but this is also a transit service route. It's a bus route. So obviously buses are very urban, so it needed to be added as well. Here's kind of an example of a boundary using physical features. So you can see along to the east here, it is following a road. However, this portion on the south is not. So kind of in order to make this a better boundary, we filled that in right there in between these roads. So now all the boundaries are including a road. Very easy to distinguish in the field. Here's another example of here's an example of an irregularity. The green is, if you can tell, it's following roads. However, the shape is very irregular. So we just filled it in there and used that divided highway as the edge, and it looks a lot better than it did. And so there's some cases where the boundary would be on one side of a divided highway, and then out of nowhere it would shoot across to the other side, and go along the other side of the route. That's okay, but they prefer that to be done at intersections. So, because find that spot where it just jumps across the median, without it being an intersection, you can't really find that in the field. So usually we try to include both sides of the highway if we're using it. Now there's times when we don't want the highway to be urban for some reason. Depending on the area, there could be a bunch of reasons. We wouldn't include both sides of the highway. We'd stop on one side and call it rural. So here's an example of an interchange. The rule is that for an interchange or a access controlled roadway, it's either in or it's out. There's no in between. So you can see on this interchange that the northeast and the southwest corners are kind of included. Now, like I said before, because it's included, those portions are included, we couldn't take them away. So really, we had no choice but to add this entire interchange because part of it was already included. I think this is the last example. So I don't know, it's a very good example, but so they like portions of a roadway to be consistently rural and urban, or rural or urban. This is more of a case of when we go to classify it in functional class. If you see the northern part of that road in the red that's circled in pink, where it hits the divided highway, that first portion is both sides are included in the urban area. Then in the pink side, it's only one side is included. So when we're doing our functional class review, which is what would be done next, once this is approved, we would go back and change all the rural and urban and functional class, and then we'd also do a statewide review of functional class. But in this case, you wouldn't want this first part to be urban, and then the last part right there to be rural. You kind of, it's because it's bordering the boundary, you would want all that to be urban or rural. You kind of don't want to break it up like that. I think that's my presentation. This was kind of a difficult presentation because it's more of a I've always done it to local officials, kind of telling them how to do it, which is kind of the way this presentation went. But if there's any questions, please let me know.
Hey, Ramsey, we got a question in the chat from David Silverette. Can you split urban areas into different labeled areas? On a related note, can you create urban areas that are back to back, or is there a required buffer zone?
You broke up on that last part of the question.
You said, or is there a required buffer zone?
Yes. So seconds. So this is an example of Frankfurt. So the green is the 2020 census boundary. The blue are the portions that we added. And to give you an example, this pans over. Well, I guess down here. So these red dots are major traffic generators. You can see I've got a couple down here that are not included. I think in the past, they've allowed like maybe you can go as much as 2.5 miles away from the census boundary to pick up something like that. I believe this year they dropped it down to 1.5 miles. So to answer the question of the buffer, if there's something over 1.5 miles away and there's nothing in between, you can't draw or can't add part to the boundary to go over there to that 1.5 or 2 mile, whatever is away, to include it. No.
Well, I guess
Uh,
that's kind of related to what I was saying, but I guess what I was talking about was sort of the inverse, where, like, for example, perhaps around the Louisville area, like, do you have to, can you create like multiple like labels of urban areas that are like really close to each other, or do you have to, or is there a required buffer zone between the different urban areas?
no, they can touch.
Okay.
So there's several like Richmond and Berea touch, Lexington and Jessamine touch, or Lexington and Nicholasville touch. Was it Louisville? What is up there? Louisville, LaGrange, and another one. They all three touch.
Okay,
So
and then you could also like create a new, can you create like a new urban area from an existing urban area, or does it have to be specifically defined by the Census Bureau?
no, it has to be defined. So
Okay.
we can't just go to somewhere in the state and say, oh, that looks like an urban area. Let's create a new one. No, they have what's already created, and we're doing is expanding,
Oh,
adding
okay.
to it.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, David, for the question. Does anybody else have any other questions for Ramsey? So how often does this update, Ramsey? I mean, are you going to expect to be doing this again another 4 years or 3 years or
But it's every 10 years.
10
So
years? Okay.
so they'll come out with in 2030, probably around 2032, they'll come out with new areas based on the 2030 census.
Okay.
And so, there's a process, but usually by the end of whatever that fourth year is kind of when these adjustments are due from the state cabinets or from the transportation cabinets of each state.
Awesome.
So it is every 10 years for us. Yes.
Well, appreciate that, your presentation, and we're running a little bit behind, so I want to jump to our next speaker, Cassandra Cruikshank. Cassandra, if you want to go ahead and get your presentation pulled up, I will get your bio read, and you can start presenting. Cassandra Cruikshank is an environmental biologist at KYTC with the Division of Environmental Analysis. She will be presenting about KYTC's wildlife crossing study, which looks to determine stressors surrounding wildlife vehicle collisions and the intention of installing wildlife crossings at multiple points across Kentucky. Thank you, Cassandra.
Thank you very much. My name is Cassandra Cruikshank, and I have been helping out with the wildlife crossings. First of all, can you all hear me all right?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
All right, wonderful. I'm at home today with 2 little ones, so we're working with what we got. So I am helping out with our wildlife crossings initiative. This, first and foremost, I want to give credit where credit is due. This presentation today and most of the effort has been done by Andrew Logsdon. He's our ecology and permitting branch manager. He has really spearheaded this effort. This effort was first brought to DEA from up on high on the 6th floor. It was an initiative that has been gaining traction and interest that they would like KYTC to start addressing. So I wanted to share some information on wildlife crossings today, but also on what KYTC is doing with those initiatives. So wildlife crossings in general are becoming a more normalized idea in the U.S. Due to quite a few factors. There are quite a bit of expenses associated with wildlife collisions. $8 billion in medical costs and vehicle repairs annually. Now, thankfully, the death rate due to animal collisions is rather low. It's around 200 people on average per year. But if there is any way, shape, or form that KYTC can bring down the risk to the public, we definitely want to address that for health and human safety. There's also the ecology conservation standpoint. Estimates suggest that there are more than 1 million animals every day that get killed by automobile collisions. It's one of the biggest factors in wildlife habitat fracturing, as far as the inability for animals to access habitat that they require. So there is the conservation side to that we do want to be considerate of. Here in DEA, when we have federal projects, we do have to address Section 7, which is the Endangered Species Act, and sometimes some of these animals do fall under that act. So it is something that we want to consider as well as human safety. There's also the genetic element behind it all. If animals are separated by a road from other populations of animals, then the genetic diversity in those groups becomes less and less, which actually makes it harder and harder for those groups to survive and pass on their lineages. So, and oftentimes, depending on the heavy flow of traffic, those highways and roads can often become what is essentially just a wall, where animals cannot get through really at all. So there are a lot of reasons that we would like to address animal collisions and utilization of wildlife crossings. So the type of wildlife crossings that we're talking about, they can come in multiple forms: land bridges, overpasses, tunnels, culverts, viaducts. It really depends on the species that we are considering. There are some populations of protected animals that require very specialized wildlife crossings. Certain salamanders, amphibians, things like that, reptiles. Reptiles and amphibians are one of the two types of species that are hit the hardest by roads, no pun intended. But what we're mainly focusing on here in Kentucky, at least at the beginning of our wildlife crossings, is deer strike. And now that we have an established elk population in Kentucky, elk strike as well, as long as bears, those larger fauna that are mostly responsible for the wildlife collisions that we see here in Kentucky. So when we successfully implement these wildlife crossings, they greatly reduce the likelihood of collisions, sometimes up to 80%, depending on the area, depending on the type of crossing. And they definitely provide that safe corridor for animal transit. This concept of wildlife crossings for roads was first developed in France, and it really took off in the Netherlands. And the reason that we're looking, overseas for these kind of ideas is this is still a relatively new idea here in America, and we want to make sure that if we are creating wildlife crossings, we are replicating instances where they have been extremely successful. The Dutch overpass that's been constructed spans over half mile, and you can see by this image, these wildlife crossings can become very ambitious. They can span over entire 8-lane highways. They can be as large as we want them to be within reason for funding's sake. But the idea of a large, very elaborate wildlife crossing that can facilitate multiple species is definitely an idea that is being utilized and is being successful. Some of the wildlife crossings that we are kind of noting as being extremely successful, there's the Banff National Park in Alberta, Canada. There's 44 structures, 6 bridges, 38 underpasses. They were built for wildlife to traverse the Trans-Canadian Highway. It's the nation's longest road, which bisects the park. Not an ideal location for a very long road in your park, but in order to augment that, wildlife crossings were created. And since its construction, they have documented more than 150,000 wildlife crossings by a great variety of larger fauna, elk, your moose, black bears, cougar, grizzly bears, all those larger animals, and an untold number of smaller animals that are a little harder to detect. One of the things that really benefited from this particular wildlife crossing a few years ago, there was some studies done that indicated that grizzly bears in particular were actually losing a lot of their dianetic diversity. It was causing a lot of inbreeding issues. It was causing a lot of lack of population growth. But with this particular area, this wildlife crossing actually helped to stabilize that genetic flow. And this is one of the places that contributed to 80% reduction in motor accidents, reduction in wildlife strikes. So they can be very effective, and they can work really, really well for health and human safety and for a more stable ecosystem. So where is Kentucky in all of this? We are working on it, in Andrew's words, but we have actually made leaps and bounds in the past few months. This is a program or an idea that really took off in the past 6 months, and our team has really jumped on it and put a lot of effort into it. And so far, I'm extremely happy with where we are headed and how far we have come. So there's a grant funding opportunity to construct wildlife crossings through FHWA's Wildlife Crossing Pilot Program. This particular PowerPoint was made prior to the awards by that. So there have been some updates, but the applications were due by August 1st. And we were able in 3 months' time to really pull together as a team, get a consultant on it to write our proposal. And we had a moment at, like the 48-hour mark where we weren't sure we were going to make it, but everybody really pulled together and did some overtime and got it together, and we got our proposal in. And this was our proposal. It was Kentucky's Wildlife Vehicle Collision Reduction Plan. And along with this state plan, we proposed that we do a site-specific study on the corridor for I-64 and US 60 that runs between Frankfort and Louisville. And we got it. We were so happy and excited. We were awarded $1.6 million to make this plan and do this study, and we were just very elated. So it's so far so good. So what we're going to study in this is we applied for non-construction funds at first in order to do a statewide study. We need to know exactly where the need is in Kentucky and what type of wildlife crossings are going to be the most effective for us. Right now, I can tell you that our main idea is to stick with culverts that go under highways and roads for now, simply because they are the most simple and most cost effective. But we are hoping to branch out after this initial study to do overpasses, to do whatever is what we would consider the most effective, depending on the area that we want to build it in. We coordinated with multiple agencies and environmental experts to develop the proposal, and for any plan that we move forward on, we are definitely going to partner with other agencies that may have experts in animal movements, agencies and consultants that have experts in construction of wildlife crossings. So we are not just relying on our own knowledge, we're definitely relying on the expertise of a collective of people and experts. So we're going to implement a planning process with 2 compatible and beneficial scopes, a statewide plan, and the focus corridor study. And one of the backings that we had, the idea for this, to get the funding and to show that yes, Kentucky actually really can benefit from this funding, is that as far as according to State Farm in 2022, the likelihood of an animal involved in a claim for Kentucky is 1 in 85. So every claim that State Farm got, 1 in 85 was a wildlife strike, and that's just what's being reported. There are so many instances, especially in rural Kentucky, where if an animal strike happens and there's no real damage to the car, often people will just drive away. These are just the ones we know that were reported. And Kentucky ranks 19th in the nation for reported animal collisions. We have a lot of rural area. We have a lot of forest land and grassland in Kentucky. And those are some favorite habitat of deer. So we definitely have the habitat, and we definitely have the need to mitigate these strikes. So KYTC is going to start a comprehensive assessment of existing road networks and its impact on wildlife populations. This is going to be a study that we conduct to see where the most problematic areas are and where we should address them. And the focused study corridor that we chose, again, is that I-64, US 64 between Frankfort, Kentucky, the state capital, and the Jefferson County, Louisville metro area. It's the most populous area in the entire state. And this is going to run through Jefferson, Shelby, and Franklin County. So it's a 3-county study area. So why did we pick this area specifically? As you can tell from this image, each one of those orange dots is a crash with an animal. Now, we get our data from the state law enforcement, and they tend to report in one of 2 ways. Either you struck a deer or you struck something else. So this crash data is just reflective of, this is, somebody called it in, it damaged the vehicle enough that somebody wanted to file a claim. So as you can tell, almost the entire area over, I believe this data is only 2 years old, almost this entire area has at some point experienced some kind of wildlife collision. So as you can tell, the top portion is animal crashes. That's any animal other than a deer. And the red is deer crashes in general. One of the areas that we kind of considered, if you look in northern Kentucky, is near Cincinnati area. But one of the reasons that we chose this particular corridor is that people travel at such a higher speed. I-64 is 70 miles an hour, US 60 is 55. There becomes an increase in likelihood in death or medical incident, accident. So we decided that this corridor had a higher health and human safety aspect to it that we wanted to address. And there again, and you can tell that Kentucky is just one of those states that just almost every single major road is just a solid red line. So this is definitely something that wildlife crossings could alleviate as long as we install them properly and do our work and do our homework and make this statewide study really as elaborate as we possibly can. So who are we going to work with? We have a strategic partnership with the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources. They were actually one of the first people that we reached out to because they have that data on particularly elk and deer herd movements. They have breeding season data. They have all of the data when it comes to location of animals and how they move. And we really want to partner with knowledgeable people who can help us understand where these animals are moving and why they're moving where they are. Some of the supporting agencies, and some of them are NGOs, non-government people, but it's U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Kentucky Field Office, has our back, along with the American Farmland Trust, Nature Conservancy, and Kentucky Sportsman Caucus, just to name a few. One of the states that we're actually looking to as an example of how we should set up our wildlife crossings and how we should do our statewide studies is Virginia. They're about 5 to 7 years ahead of us, and they have reached out and they're willing to assist Kentucky in this effort, in a state-by-state effort. They've actually completed a successful wildlife vehicle collision plan, and they're moving into the planning and construction phase soon. So since they are ahead of us, we can watch what they build. We can look at the data they collect off of those wildlife crossings, see what worked, see what didn't, and hopefully have a more successful construction phase when we move into our own. And then 67 elected officials throughout the state prepared letters of support for our plan. So we have a lot of support, both on the public level, the government level, just a statewide collective yes from everybody. So we're really excited. We ask you to please stay tuned. We are just getting started, and we are hoping that in the next 2 years, we will have a finished state plan and hopefully be getting ready to build our own wildlife crossings and see those wildlife vehicle collisions go severely down.
Awesome. Thank you, Cassandra. You did get one question from Robert Kohler. And if you don't know, next speaker might. So what percentage of all crashes is those involving animal strikes? Do you have an idea?
As far as the statewide, so 1 in 85 crashes involves an animal. This is according to State Farm. I suppose I could calculate that percentage very quickly. But that's just the ones that we know. That's just the ones that are reported.
Okay. And then another question from Brent Swager. How can folks in planning and design study the need for wildlife crossings as part of their project? Can DEA put together a scope of work that we could use? Could this be part of the work you're doing?
Sure. Okay. That's a big question, but so one of the things that we're really looking at is where are the crashes taking place? Where are we finding the roadkill? If a good example, again with this corridor, we decided to study. There was an incident in 2014 where, I believe it's 2014, where a lot of calls were being made to KYTC that the guys who collect the roadkill and transport it elsewhere left the carcasses for pickup in the middle of the median, and there were 26 dead deer in the middle of the median, and I believe on I-64. So it's one of those indicators of, if you are doing a construction project, look at your crash data, or ask us to look at your crash data and see if, especially if it's a 6-year plan federally funded project, where we can have that funding to create that wildlife crossing, look at that and see if there is a need for your particular project. Look at that and see where would make a good location to put a wildlife crossing in your project. We're in such the beginning of the inception of all of this that we'd really like to get a few studies under our belt and a few wildlife crossings built under our belt before we start sharing it statewide, just to make sure that we're successful and we're not wasting funds on areas that it might not work for some reason that we can't foresee. So, but it is definitely something that we would like people to note, especially if they're working on federally funded projects.
Thank you, Cassandra. As an aside, my daughter is a non-traditional instruction day, and one of her assignments was to read a book and answer questions. And the book was called Critter Crossings, which was about wildlife crossings, believe it or not. So the young children, the third graders, are already learning about these early on. So, and that was gonna. I was just going to say, for as a follow up, I figured there's a couple people in attendance that might know some of these crash statistics. And I wasn't wrong. Mike Vaughn, who's our next speaker, it said for calendar year 2021, about 5% of all recorded collisions were either collision with deer or animal. And then
Yes.
Jason Sawala also posted some statistics as well. From the Collision Facts book in 2022.
Well, thank you, Mike and Jason. Yeah, any inquiries at all, send them at me. We're more than happy to not only answer questions and get some potential ideas of where we could put these that would be the most effective, but also just to show the support. I'm sure a lot of people at KYTC know that there can be a lot of fervor for projects and ideas at the start, and then the years go by and they kind of drop off. Other things become more important. So we definitely want to continue to show that not just a public interest, but the KYTC interest as well. So definitely send me your emails.
All right, well, we had one last question from Tom Lovett. He says, how do you anticipate determining the best place to put a crossing in virtually every inch of 64 between Louisville and Frankfort recorded animal strikes?
So and I'm definitely going to be excited to show what our studies, we're going to do a 2-year study on the corridor, and I will be definitely excited to share like what we discovered during that. But one of the implementations that we want to use would be exclusionary fencing to funnel the wildlife to the crossing and where it is. But also, we want to do the study to understand, okay, why are they crossing where they're crossing? Are they crossing for food? Are they crossing for breeding purposes? Are they crossing due to some kind of disturbance, such as farming during certain times of the year? Definitely want to do that. But during the construction of any type of wildlife crossing, usually exclusionary fencing is used to funnel animals in. There are places in Colorado where exclusionary fencing goes on for 15, 20 miles. I'm not saying that's what we're going to need to do here, but it is something that we will probably end up implementing. There's also a lot of studies that suggest that once the animals know where the crossings are and they can use them safely, they'll actually take their young to that crossing, show them where the crossing is, and then those young will continue to use the crossing as they grow into adulthood and then carry that knowledge on. So as long as the crossing continues to be hospitable and the animals know where it is, ideally they will pass that on generationally and continue to use it. So, but again, I want to get the study, and I want to see what the study says before we start coming up with ideas of what we're going to do.
Awesome. Thank you, Cassandra. We are running a little bit behind. We have another speaker remaining on the agenda. So Mike, Vaughn, I know you're out there, go ahead and pull your presentation up. I'm going to run through your intro, and then you can start presenting. Mike Vaughn is the Traffic Safety Branch Manager for the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet within the Division of Traffic Operations at the central office in Frankfort, Kentucky. In his current role, Mike leads a team of engineers who administer Kentucky's Highway Safety Improvement Program. Mike is KYTC's representative on the Pavement Surface Properties Pool Fund Study. He is also one of KYTC's representatives on the AASHTO Committee on Safety. Mike is a graduate of the University of Kentucky with a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Kentucky. Mike lives in Kentucky's capital city of Frankfort with wife Emily and their 2 boys, Mason and Aaron. He will be presenting today about the Highway Safety Improvement Program initiatives and post-data evaluation of those initiatives. All right, Mike, take it away.
Thanks, Nathan. Can you guys see my slideshow?
You're good. We can hear you.
All right, good deal. I'm not necessarily trying to be cute with my title, but I do believe evaluation is the start of all of our projects, the phase before planning. I think a lot of people, when they think about the project life cycle, they tend to think planning is the start and evaluation is what we do a few years after the project is done. And that's not necessarily wrong. But I have gravitated toward this idea of the circular view of the project life cycle. And I think a lot of people have. But one difference that I perceive, and I could be wrong about this, but one thing that I perceive is a lot of people, when they visualize the circular project life cycle, they actually visualize this. You might be thinking, well, what was different? And it is the location of where people place planning and evaluation on the circular version of the project lifecycle graphic. Again, I think a lot of people think of planning as the start and evaluation as the end. And, we read from top left to right and bottom to top. And so I think subconsciously we put planning where we perceive the start of this circle. And, I like to think of it like this, that evaluation is where we should be starting. What has worked in the past, what has not worked in the past, and then start planning and designing and moving through the project life cycle. But just a little background of why I think evaluation is such a critical part of the project life cycle. So as the title would suggest, I'm going to talk about some of the evaluations of a couple of our recent major safety initiatives within the HSIP. First up will be our roadway departure corridors, talk about what those are, the types of countermeasures we deploy, some of the evaluation results. Then I'll move into our restricted crossing U-turn intersections. A lot of you all have probably heard the term R-cut over the last few years. So talk about what R-cuts are, how they operate, get a little bit into how they help drivers, because they are a little bit of a counterintuitive intersection design, but then finish up with those evaluation results as well. So let's just jump right into what an RD corridor is. The target facility type for this initiative is rural 2-lane roadways that have a posted speed limit of 50 mile per hour or greater. Obviously, as the name would suggest, our target crash type is roadway departure. This does not necessarily mean that it's only single vehicle head-on and side swap opposite directions. There's occasionally other oddball crash types that do technically classify as roadway departure, but these three crash types make up the lion's share of roadway departure crashes. Historically, our RD corridor projects have been anywhere from 4 to 12 miles. Actually, some have been just a touch outside of even that range, but the vast majority have had a length between 5 and 8 miles long. We don't necessarily invest a lot of money on those corridors. We average somewhere in the range of $250,000 per mile to up to maybe as high as $400,000 per mile on some of the shorter corridors. So we're kind of being very judicious and with our funding. We do what we can where we can, and not necessarily going big at any stretch of these corridors. This has been a pretty major initiative for us since 2013, so going on 10 years now. And by major, it's where the lion's share of our annual apportionment has been placed. We've been investing anywhere in the range of 21 to 30 million per year over these last 10 years. So a lot of investments went into this initiative. So some of the improvements we make, we widen or pave shoulders, kind of what we're looking to sort of maximize, the most we would likely widen to is about 26 feet of total pavement to give us 11-foot lanes and 2-foot paved shoulders. At 25 feet, we're able to add centerline and edgeline rumble strips. And so we kind of view those as the primo roadway departure countermeasure. And once we're able to get enough width for those types of rumble strips we don't necessarily see for our program. That additional investment and additional width doesn't necessarily give us commensurate returns on investment. So we tend to cap our widening to this type of cross section. Now, that said, we don't necessarily do a lot of pavement widening with these projects. You know, a lot of y'all are familiar with our rural 2-lane roadways. A lot of times there is very challenging roadside as soon as you leave the edge of pavement. And so this second item, roadside regrading, this is probably the most common countermeasure we implement with these corridor projects. And that kind of goes hand in glove with the culvert pipe extensions and the installation of more crash-worthy head walls. A lot of these older roads have the old standard head wall that creates a pretty significant snag opportunity. So we do invest quite a bit in roadside regrading and pipe extensions. Maybe not a lot of money, but equally important is improving the signing and delineation along the route. We do target super elevation and pavement cross slope improvements in certain areas. And when we go and change the elevation of an edge of pavement by changing the super elevation or cross slope, that does require us to regrade the roadside. A few other things we do is removal of trees or trimming canopy, and then removing and replacing substandard guardrail, especially in treatments. And I'll touch on some of those in a little bit. But the big goal we have is we try our best to keep all improvements within existing right-of-way so that as many of our program dollars go to actual construction improvements and not these sort of ancillary costs that don't necessarily give us a direct safety benefit. So here's a few photos of some of these. I've got some before and after photos. Some are just the after, but you know, here's a project where we did some strategic widening, got a little bit wider lane, some paved shoulders, some edgeline rumble strips. Obviously had to regrade the roadside. Didn't do a lot on the outside of this curve. Most of the roadside regrading that's more notable is on the inside to open up the sight line. And you can see that we've also removed some trees and added some signing. Here's a kind of a spot specific example that was along a corridor, but we had a pretty deep hole that led into a cross drain very near the edge of pavement that we took the head wall off, put in a drop box, regraded the roadside to get the flow into this new drop box to work. And a little bit of pavement widening through here to get us some edge-on rumble strips and about 1 foot of paved shoulder. Here's another one, a little bit more extensive roadside regrading. Again, you can see we kept it within the right-of-way. This would have been a road where we were following the KRS statutory presumed right-of-way, where we're going by utility poles and fence lines, but we improved the roadside as much as we could up to that existing fence line, added a DGA wedge to kind of help with any future drop-offs that may exist, and a little bit of strategic widening here as well. Here's one where we kind of did a lot. There was some super elevation improvement, maybe even some, I can't remember if this one was strategic curve widening or if we were trying to widen more of the corridor. My recollection, this was a little bit more of a strategic pavement widening, kind of more through this challenging curve. Some DGA wedge, roadside regrading. Unique here though is we did hoe ram about 3 to 4 feet from off the rock face to help with some of the sight distance. Didn't necessarily get complete sight distance, but we did what we could with the right of way we had. Also some signing work, and then remove and replace the guardrail out there. And so these next few slides, I want to talk a little bit about what I mean by some of our targeted guardrail in treatment. So right out the gate, if there's just no in treatment, it's a spearing hazard. Clearly, we have to target those. I mean, that's just such a risk to drivers. Kind of next up is that type 7, the old turn down in treatment. Those don't always perform well when they get hit. Another one that kind of is similar to the type 7, it's different, but is what we call our dipping type 3. It's how we installed the top 3 in treatment before we switched up the standard drawings to include the pipe and the ditch line and filling that in with embankment and keeping the guardrail height at the proper height throughout the taper into the back slope. But so before that, they kind of dipped, and I've got some photos. And then the last one we target's the old breakaway cable terminal. It's the top 4 in treatment before the top 4A came along. So here's a simple photo of what I mean by a spearing end. Here's a top 7. There's actually two versions of the top 7. There's the strong post and weak post. This one's the strong post. It can definitely launch a vehicle, especially small and light vehicles when they hit this. Here is a couple of photos of same location, just different perspectives of what I call a dipping top 3. And like you can see, the guardrail is at height, but the height follows the slope, it's not relative to the near pavement edge. And so there are certain crash situations where a vehicle can kind of hit the end of this and get launched as well. And so we try to target these and put in the current standard drawing of the type 3 so that edge or elevation of the guardrail is consistent with the pavement edge. The last one is the breakaway cable terminal. A lot of people call these the BCTs. Again, this is what our top 4 used to be before the 4A came along. These can be a little bit tough for folks to identify, but there's a few telltale signs, kind of the little bit easier to recognize once you start getting the hang of it is the first 2 posts are wooden. They're breakaway, so they've usually got the hole drilled, 2 to 4 inches above grade. But those 2 wooden posts are set in concrete. This in treatment, 37.5 foot long, typically installed on a parabola, so that kind of helps them stand out. But another feature is the very end of the in treatment has a pretty large piece of metal that wraps around it, and it makes it look like a boxing glove. Big old ugly end to it, so that sort of makes them stick out. So jumping into some of our evaluation results here. Since 2013, we have let, at this point, I should have counted this up last couple of days. I'm pretty sure we've let over 100 of these projects, but we have 42 of them that we've evaluated because they have at least 3 years of after data. And a lot of them that we have 5 years or more. We just tend to cap at the 5 years after it was constructed to keep the analysis a little simpler. But the point with these numbers here is to show it's not 42 based on just 3 years of data. A lion's share of these have 5 years, and a pretty good number have 4 years of after data too. So I think the results that you're going to see have a little bit more meaning because we have a lot of after years in these results. So of these 42, we only had 1 project that actually saw an increase in fatal and injury crashes. And you're going to hear me talk about fatal and injury quite a bit over these next couple of slides about this initiative. And I do mean all injury. I have a few that I talk about fatal and serious injury. And the 2 number, like when it comes to severity, the first 2 crash types we're most worried about is fatal and serious injury. Fortunately, those fatal and serious injuries are pretty small in number. It's a good thing, but the bad thing is it doesn't lead to a lot of sample size, so it makes before and after evaluations a little more questionable. So we tend to lump all the severities of injury into our fatal and injury crash category for the evaluation. But again, we only had 1 project that saw a slight increase in fatal and injury crashes in the after period. And when you think about 1 out of 42, that's a pretty good result. We did have another where the fatal and injury crashes ended up being like the exact same number, so 0 change. But that again leaves 40 projects where we did see a decrease in fatal and injury crashes, and those decreases range anywhere from 15 to 84%. In fact, most of the percentages were quite a bit higher than 15%. We had a few that were down around there, but a large number of these were pretty significant decreases. And if we look at sort of the entire initiative, what we're seeing is an average decrease of 52% of those fatal and injury crashes. Pretty significant number there, especially considering that we're averaging somewhere between 250,000 to 400,000 per mile on project cost. We don't necessarily worry too much about property damage only crashes, but we're also seeing a 39% decrease in those. So, you know, that also is a good sign that the improvements we're doing is just helping everybody. If we start looking more specifically at the fatal and serious injury crashes, so what I did here is I had the annual average in the before and the annual average in the after period and just summed those up for all 42 crashes. And so on a per year basis, those 42 corridors were averaging 10.4 fatal crashes in the before period, and in the after we're averaging 6. That's a decrease of 42% in fatal crashes. Not as high as the 52%, but still 42%, that's a big win for us. The serious injuries had a little bit higher percent reduction there at 54%. And so you can see as an entire group of 42, we were averaging 41. So you could almost think of that as every corridor was having a serious injury every year. And we've cut that number by more than half. So we're very happy with these results we've been getting. So, of course, when you get evaluation, what does that inform us with? Well, for me, what that tells me is we can achieve some major gains in safety if we do a few key things. One is, you know, let's target routes that truly have poor safety performance. In HSIP, we rely heavily on our network screening process and those excess expected crash values, especially the excess expected crash values that are based on the more severe crashes. I think it's key to implement proven safety countermeasures. A lot of the countermeasures I listed earlier, if you go look at FHWA's proven safety countermeasure list, a large number of those countermeasures show up on that list. Another thing that, you know, I started out in highway design in District 7 and very familiar with the Green Book, but, you know, we rarely are meeting Green Book recommendations with these projects, but yet we're getting pretty major decreases in those severe crashes. So to me, that means a lot of times just making whatever improvement we can within existing right-of-way will give us significant gains, even though we only may be getting a few feet here or sometimes a few inches there. You know, when people make a mistake and depart their lane, a lot of times they don't need a huge amount of space to recover. A lot of times it's just a little bit more than what they have now. And I'm not trying to say meeting full-on clear zone recommendations and things like that is a bad thing, but you know, if we're seeing these kind of reductions on these targeted routes by doing a little bit with a relatively small amount of money, just think how many miles of rural 2-lane roadways we could improve and what gains that would give us if more of our projects did average this very low per mile cost range. So just something to think about, food for thought, if you will. So moving on into the R-cuts, some of you probably have heard this term a lot, and in case you're not familiar, R-cut in some circles stands for restricted crossing U-turn. Personally, I kind of like reduced conflict U-turn. Both descriptors of an R-cut are absolutely correct. And you'll sometimes hear them referred to as a J-turn. Missouri kind of coined that term as they started implementing these intersections. And so you'll sometimes hear that term thrown out there. R cuts can be unsignalized or signalized. In Kentucky, we've mostly deployed these in the rural setting, and for the most part, well, actually to date, we have not built a signalized R cut. We've got some in development, but all of the ones we've constructed in Kentucky have been signalized. And interestingly, a few that we've done, the existing intersection was signalized. We removed the signal and constructed an R cut, or well, we constructed the R cut and then removed the signal when we opened it to traffic. Like I said, we do have a few signalized R cuts in development, but just good marketing technique that if you ever are working on a project that is implementing a corridor of signalized R cuts, several states refer to that type of project as a super street because there's a lot of safety benefits, which is very super, but a series of signalized R cuts also gives us some pretty significant capacity benefits for the corridor. So it really shines in all areas of transportation management. So an R cut, how does it operate? Well, the easy thing is that mainline traffic, nothing changes. You can still turn left, you can go straight, or you can turn right. So the large volume of vehicles going up and down the main line, they don't really have to do anything different. All the changes are with the side street, and so essentially the median in the middle of the main intersection is constructed such that it forces all side street traffic to first turn right. And if you're just wanting to go right, you just turn right and go right. But if you really want to go straight across to the other side or make a left-hand turn on the main line, you'll turn right, go a short distance to a nearby U-turn and take the U-turn and redirect to your desired movement. So in a way, it's simple, but it's counterintuitive how this could help. And so let's talk a little bit, well, how does R cuts help drivers? If you look at the number of conflict points at a traditional intersection, there's 32 conflict points, while at an R cut, there's only 14. So about 56% fewer conflict points. And the way how I think about that is fewer conflict points means lower driver workload. Now, if you're not familiar with what a conflict point is, that is essentially where two vehicles paths cross, and if one or both vehicles make a mistake, it could lead to a collision. You can see in the upper right the diagram for the 32 conflict points at a traditional intersection. The red dots are the crossing conflict points, so that's where we could experience a T-bone crash, an angle crash, or a left turn related crash that tends to produce those very severe severities of crashes. And in the bottom right, we've got the R-cut conflict point diagram. So you can see much fewer conflict points. The big feature, though, is there's only 2 of the crossing conflict points at the R-cut. So a lot less opportunity for folks to get involved in those more severe angle and left turn related crashes. So I talked a little bit of, a couple slides ago about fewer conflict points mean less driver workload. And I've got a little of a video here that maybe can help illustrate what I mean by that and how fewer conflict points help drivers. So I'm going to play this. So on a busy road, drivers have to monitor conflict points from all directions. And too many conflict points, it can make that task kind of unpredictable and it's just risky. But designs that reduce those conflict points, it makes the environment more predictable and just a less stressful experience. And a stressed out driver is more likely to make a poor decision. So that's really what I mean by lower driver workload. It's just a much more comfortable environment to interact with, and drivers tend to be a little more successful. All right, so let's jump into some of the evaluation results on our R-cut. So not as many projects to evaluate and not as many years, but we do have 15 that we've looked at. A little less than half is only 2 years of after data, and that's not ideal. But we've elected to begin evaluating at I'll call it a younger age, because we have seen very, very consistent beneficial results with these R cuts. Essentially, every location we've placed one, we have seen a decrease in fatal and injury crashes in the after period. The smallest decrease currently is 41%. We've had, I think, 2 locations where, as of today, we still have a 100% decrease in fatal and injury. And again, like in the roadway departure, this is all severities of injury, not just the serious injury, but even those minor injuries. We've had 1 or 2 spots that have not even had a minor injury in the after period. So that's significant. We have had 4 locations that have seen an increase in property damage only crashes. The smallest increase was 39%, the largest was 173%, and that may seem alarming at first, but all other locations have seen a decrease in property damage only, and the locations that have seen those significant increases in property damage only, you know, the 100% or bigger range, we have seen some of the best decreases in our fatal and injury crashes at those locations. So some of those have been as high as 100%, but even on the lower end of those particular few, the fatal and injury crashes have been 73% decrease or more. So even though we may have saw the property damage crashes go up, we have seen extremely significant decreases in fatal and injury. So we felt like that's been a very successful outcome. So similarly, if we look at the entire RCUT initiative, you know, even though I mentioned we did have one that the fatal and injury crash decrease was about 40-some%, as a whole or as a group, they're averaging a 76% decrease in fatal and injury crashes. Property damage only is not near as big at 23%, but again, those aren't necessarily a concerning crash type. When we sort of summed them all up, we are estimating that we're saving around 30 fatal and injury crashes per year with these 15 locations. And that, if you convert that into crash costs, that's about 10.9 million per year. That in crash costs, we're theoretically saving the public. The property damage only, smaller percent decrease, but there's a lot more of those, and so we're estimating that we save about 20 property damage only crashes per year at these 15 locations. Those crash costs are significantly less financial burden to the public, so they only account for about 223,000, but it does save a few dollars for the public. And so when we add those 2 values together, these 15 locations that we've implemented are estimated to save the public a little over 11 million per year in crash costs. If we then project that out over a 5-year period and compare to our construction costs, we're predicting we're going to achieve a benefit cost ratio of almost 9 to 1, 8.8 to 1. And then if you project on out into 10 years, that bumps up to a 17.6 to 1. So some pretty significant return on investment with this particular initiative. So again, what's this tell us? Well, the RCUT is a proven safety countermeasure. It's on Federal Highway's list of proven safety countermeasures, and I think we have our experience in Kentucky completely backs up that claim. And so with that in mind, I think we need to look for every opportunity we can find to either convert existing intersections to RCUTs, or seriously consider making the RCUT our default intersection when we go out and either reconstruct a 2-lane road into a multi-lane divided road, or build a new bypass, or for whatever reason we're constructing a multi-lane divided road. We need to seriously think about making the R cut, the default intersection. I mentioned that a series of signalized R cuts is called a super street. Well, I surmise a series of unsignalized R cuts would be a super street as well. So, I think if we could construct these as we move forward with these multi-lane divided roadways, the cost of an R cut's not going to be much different than just the cost of traditional intersections. So I think it's something to really think about. Now, on a related side note, when we're reconstructing or building 2-lane undivided roads, I think we need to look for every opportunity to install roundabouts and maybe consider making those the default intersection. Roundabouts have significant track record for serious decreases in fatal and injury crashes, upwards of 80-90% decrease in those crash types on when it's a single lane roundabout, when single lane roundabouts fit the 2-lane road system. So I think the 1-2 punch of roundabout and R cut could make for very, very impressive improvements across our state. So that is it. If there's any questions, be happy to take those.
Yeah, Mike, we got a couple in the chat. First, I think Keith Lovin brought up, have you done an evaluation looking at bike and ped crashes? Reginald Souleret and Jason Swallow both provided some other analysis for vulnerable road users that were added to the strategic highway safety plan. And Jason also mentioned about local road safety plans. That's something we could bring you back in for another STP meeting about to discuss. I know you were involved with some of the local road plans as well. It's something we can bring about. David Souleret said, nice animation. Do we use this in a public and or stakeholder meetings? The animation you brought up with the R cuts.
Yeah. Well, let me start with Keith's question. So we have not done a specific evaluation at bike and ped. As I mentioned, especially all 15 of the locations where we do have at least 2 years of after have all been in a rural setting. And I don't recall any bike or ped in the before period. So we haven't necessarily looked at that particular challenge area in our before after. As we start getting some of these implemented into more urban areas, I do think that's something that we'll be able to tease out. It probably a little bit too much to get into right now, but just like R cuts help motor vehicles with less driver workload, less conflict points, the R cut does the same for bike and ped, especially the pedestrians. The crossings at R cuts are much safer for a pedestrian than a traditional intersection. Let's see. I think probably the next question was David Souleret. We have used that animation we got a R-Cut project in Fayette County along Richmond Road that's kind of in the southeast portion of the county, starting just southeast of Man War and heading all the way out to I-75. And our project web page and some of our public outreach, we use that animation, and I probably should have put it on the slide, but that's a rip off and duplicate from Utah. Utah was pushing a lot of access management, and they come up with that animation to help illustrate how fewer conflict points really help ease the driver workload. And it kind of fits with the theme of how R cuts work. So we kind of took a snippet of a Utah presentation on YouTube and captured that, and we've used it at least once, maybe twice now. So the next question asks about the property damage only crashes. Where are those located? So actually, we've had almost no crashes at the U-turns. A lot of people would think that would be the the spot where we might induce some crashes, but surprisingly, we're not seeing really any crashes at the U-turns, and especially not enough to see a pattern. Where we do see a pattern of property damage is the right turn off the side street. And you when I describe it, you all go, "Oh yeah, I know that crash type." So the person in front thinking about making a right, sometimes they'll think they have a gap coming up and they start to roll forward, and then they look again and decide, "No, I'm not going to take that gap," and stop. But the person behind them, when they see them, that first car start to roll, they make the assumption that, oh, they're going, and they only look to the left to see if they can get a gap, and they just roll right into the back of them. And so it's a 1 mile per hour collision that sometimes don't result really in even hardly any property damage. But people are cautious and they call law enforcement and get a police report, and it does get logged as a property damage only crash. But the locations where we've seen the increase, the vast majority of the property damage only crashes have been that very, very low speed, just not paying attention, and I rolled into the guy in front of me type crash. So that's another thing that makes us not real concerned about the increases. Let's see, where the locations with significantly higher PDO, where the side street had higher through volumes. No, we've not really seen a rhyme or reason to why some locations have those really minor, just bumping into each other crashes on the side street. The one that's had the most probably is one of the locations where the side street volume is kind of on the lower end of our different project examples. I think it just, I don't know if it's maybe a local situation where just we happen to have some in places where everybody just seems to be in a hurry and not always paying close attention at when they're looking for their gaps or what. But Brandy mentioned, seems like the medians could be utilized as ped refuge. Yes, that's exactly part of why we see much safer crossings for pedestrians is all that median work to control the movements of the side street gives us a pretty large concrete island to act as a landing in the middle of the intersection and make that much safer for pedestrians. The other is the U-turn locations. That gives us a location where we have a bit of an interaction with vehicles, so we could possibly signalize key U-turn locations and provide a mid-block pedestrian crossing as well. That could also be two-staged. So yeah, there's a lot of real unique things that we can benefit from with our cuts as we start to deploy them more and more across Kentucky. And it looks like, yeah, Mr. Sawala did place a link to our Safer Road Solutions webpage. There's a lot of good information, not only about our cuts, but a lot of other innovative safety solutions. So if you get a chance, go check out that webpage. I think I captured everything, Nathan, but if there was anything else you saw that I didn't address, let me know.
I was going to throw out one more question. I know we're 30 minutes over. I was going to throw out one more question because we didn't get any questions about RD corridors. Can you just quickly, if you can, describe some of the features of the roadway departure corridors that might lead those roadways to be more, higher EEC values versus others? Is that an easy question or no?
Well, I can. So, obviously, narrower lanes and not much graded shoulder. And by graded, it doesn't necessarily have to be a paved shoulder. You all probably familiar with these kind of roads where as soon as you leave the pavement, it feels like you're driving into a pretty steep ditch for slope, or it's just a deep fill slope. So essentially roads that have virtually no room for error. Those tend to be the rural 2-lane roads that we commonly see ranking fairly high, which also is why I mentioned we don't necessarily do a lot of significant pavement widening with these projects. It's just we would have to build a lot of embankment or do very extensive roadside regrading to support much wider pavement widths. But that gets back to also why a lot of what we're doing is some roadside regrading that we can achieve within the right of way. A lot of times these projects, we're trying to provide the driver with 1 to 2 feet of earth shoulder. So taking what little bit of space we do have and just giving them some opportunity, even if it's only at higher speeds, 1 or 2 foot of shoulder may only be a second's worth of recovery opportunity, but sometimes that can be the difference between a really bad crash and a lower severity crash, or a crash versus no crash. So I would say it's a lot of these roadways that just, as soon as you leave the edge of pavement, you have very little recovery room. A lot of times 0 recovery room, or just inches. And we're trying to, like I said, get about a foot or 2 of graded, usable earth shoulder, and then tie that back down as quick as we can within right of way. And in any pipe extensions that have to occur to support that regrading, we perform those.
Awesome.
And I'm not saying wider lanes are the answer. You know what I mean? Like I think something we have to start thinking about evaluating as an agency is, there may be a width, maybe it's 10 and a half, 11, I don't know. Maybe it is 12, but like we could be inducing some higher speeds with 12-foot wide lanes. I don't know the answer to that yet, but a lot of what we have done really isn't changing lane width per se. And like I said, we never go higher than 11 feet, just because mainly it's the cost thing. But as we've had a lot of success, it makes me wonder, well, maybe there is something less than 12 that truly is the sweet spot of giving people a little bit more wiggle room in the lane, but not necessarily induce higher speeds. But so just something, food for thought for everybody. Again, I don't know the answer yet. We're trying to pour through some of our statewide data to help us answer that question, but just a thought I've had.
Awesome. Hey, Mike, I really appreciate you presenting. I appreciate everybody sticking around with the extra 30 minutes or so we had scheduled. Looking forward to seeing people in April. If you like the topics that were brought up today, feel free to shoot me an email suggesting more topics or any other suggestions. That being said, that concludes our state transportation planning meeting. And unless Steve or Mikhail tells me otherwise. We good? I might have caught them off guard. Thank you, everybody, for attending and participating and asking great questions. Thank you.
Thank you.